You're listening to the IBJ Media Podcast Network.
The move pushes Indianapolis closer to becoming the center of women's sports.
Now city leaders are looking ahead, coming up with a plan to keep Indiana in the game.
It's going to be the best equipment, the best nutritionist for girls. Yep. Designed for girls, and I kind of wish it were around when I was playing soccer.
The push by Indianapolis to make women's sports a cornerstone of its sports strategy didn't begin with Caitlin Clark's arrival. A new professional women's volleyball team was already being pulled together in late 2023, ahead of its debut at the Fishers Event Center earlier this year. A women's tackle football team was also in development, and plans were percolating for a massive girls-focused sports complex in Northwest Indiana. For years, the city has hosted major women's sports events like the Big Ten Women's Basketball Tournament, 3 NCAA Final Fours, with a 4th on the way in 2028, gymnastics championships, and swimming competitions, ranging from Division III championships to the U.S. Olympic swim trials. Then came Clark, drafted by the Fever in 2024, and her rise to the top of league merchandise sales, endorsement values, and rookie records, supercharging the city's already in progress efforts with her star power.
Years and years ago, companies would support women's sports out of benevolence. Now it's a business deal.
I'd say we're already putting a lot of money where our mouth is as a community.
When you put a vision out there and you get people really galvanized around it, I think there's just something different around that.
So no, Caitlin Clark wasn't the catalyst. But now that she's here, sports tourism leaders say it's undeniable that she's played a major role in carrying the interest and the momentum forward. Still, the story of Indianapolis' bid to become a true hub for women's sports is bigger than any one player. It's about leveraging more than 40 years of hosting major events and setting a vision that stretches decades into the future. Because as exciting as the Caitlin Clark era may be, no one can guarantee she'll stay in Indianapolis forever. That's why the city is betting on something bigger, a long-term plan to make Indianapolis a global capital for every corner of the sports industry. I'm Mickey Shuey, and this is Beyond Clarkonomics, a podcast by IBJ Media.
The number 1 overall draft pick in 2024. Let's hear it. Caitlin Clark to Indiana.
Caitlin Clark is an American icon.
I can't think of a better place for myself to start my career. A place that loves basketball, supports women's basketball.
Everything came together perfectly for the Indiana Fever.
This giant opportunity to cast Indy as a place to visit.
This is Beyond Clarkonomics.
Since its founding in 1979, the Indiana Sports Corp has sought to set Indianapolis apart from every other city interested in going after major sporting events. And for decades, that was the extent of the city's sports strategy. Not just bringing in events, but raising the standards, both for the event's rights holders and other cities that might go after the event in the future. But then the Indiana Sports Corp rolled out its new plan, the 2050 Vision, in September 2024, on the floor of Gainbridge Fieldhouse, home to the Indiana Pacers and Fever. This renewed strategy, built around 5 distinct pillars, was the most ambitious plan in the organization's history for how it would pursue, win, and execute major events and other initiatives tied to the sports industry, with the goal of being a national leader in the space in the next 25 years. Those pillars are tied to sporting events, the agency's bread and butter, technology, academia, and business leadership. The final pillar stands on its own, women's sports, with the goal of helping the state become, as the Sports Corp put it, the women's sports capital of the world, in a way that not only brought events, but created unique environments for leaders, entrepreneurs, and other professionals looking to make waves in the industry. Sarah Meyer is Chief of Staff for the Indiana Sports Corp and spearheaded the development of the 2050 Vision.
The 2050 Vision is something that we started doing research around in the fall of 2022, actually, and talked to a lot of partners, current and potential, some that we haven't never even worked with throughout the country and obviously locally here too. and really thinking about what that future is of the sports strategy. So we have obviously been successful with the first 45 years of the sports strategy, which was really around major events, sports organizations, and sports venues. And now we were the first sports commission ever created in the country. So really forward thinking on this strategy. But now when you look at around the country, a lot of people are using this strategy, a lot of great cities. There's a lot of great sports host cities. So it's all about what's that next iteration of sports strategy? How do we stay above the competition more than events? How do we expand what a sports city looks like?
Meyer said that Caitlin Clark has played a significant role in aiding the launch of the new strategy, both directly and indirectly, and that her name is intrinsically tied to the city, a connection that allows local leaders to showcase the ways they see Indianapolis setting itself apart. But she added that while Clark has been a major boon for the city and the league, there's plenty of space for others to promote top-tier women's athletics, including opportunities for new teams and new events to take center stage.
There's the Caitlin effect, and that's huge, and you see it in the signage right now. But I think it's important as we continue to move this women's sports movement forward. I think you have to remember there's other players who have a lot of impact too. Going back to my experience in Tampa this past spring at the Women's Final Four, it was all about Paige. All of these little girls who had their hair back in those braids. And that made me really excited too, because I was thinking, okay, we're building these stars again. It's not just going to be Caitlin, but there are others who are really coming up too. And when you talk to big fans of the WNBA itself, it isn't just about Caitlin. I think I hear them get excited about a lot of the other players. If you're going to support women's sports, you should be promoting a lot of the athletes.
Liz Wanless, the director of the Sports Innovation Institute at Indiana University, Indianapolis, said neither the team nor the league can let themselves become too reliant on Clark, something that proved itself out with her missing extensive time this season due to injuries. In fact, both have already felt the effects of what happens when newcomers don't have Clark as a draw. As of Thursday, August 21st, Caitlin Clark has missed 22 games during the 2025 season, due to quad and groin injuries. There's no timeline for her return. Likewise, Sophie Cunningham, Ari McDonald, and Sydney Colson are also out for the remainder of the season due to injuries of their own. Still, there's reason to be optimistic that high tides, in this case intense interest around a single player, can raise all boats. While ratings show viewership numbers are dropping amid Clark's absence, they're still significantly higher than they were before she was drafted. According to sports business news site Sportico, 7 WNBA games in the 2025 season have surpassed 1 million viewers, 5 of those featuring the Fever. In 2024, the figure was 22 throughout the season. But average viewership for nationally televised WNBA games across the board are up by more than 20% from the same pre-All-Star break period last year. And the All-Star game itself, also without Clark, saw a dip of 36% from the 2024 event in which she participated. But that audience of more than 2 million is still a dramatic increase from the 850,000 that watched the 2023 game. But the city's ability, year in and year out, to execute on big events is far more important than a single big-time player, Wanless said.
It's an interesting discussion to have, because is it just about one player? Is it just about athletic performance? Or are there other metrics by which we measure ourselves and the ability to produce a city that is a global landing spot for women's sport? And I think that, especially with the WNBA All-Star game, that Indiana was tested here for how we could execute a women's sport event, the marketing, the activations, etc., around that event. And Indiana absolutely proved itself. While the visibility from someone like Caitlin Clark and the excitement around someone like Caitlin Clark that I believe will maintain. I believe that she will be back and that she will be able to maintain these injuries, just like many athletes have had to do the same over time. I also think that the way that Indiana is building the infrastructure has been shown to be effective. So, bottom line, Indiana executed on this event. They're executing on the community infrastructure. They're executing on many of the initiatives that they set out to achieve. And that will be markers of Indianapolis as a global landing spot for women's sport.
One said that for the games Clark has missed, particularly early on in the season, there's been a significant drop-off in viewership. But that doesn't mean the swell of support dissolved entirely.
There are two important metrics that were definitely affected, and it wasn't a coincidence. So we saw that TV viewership fell. The national broadcast for the WNBA fell by 55% after Caitlin Clark had to take some time away for injury. We also saw that the Indiana Fever national broadcast audience was reduced by 53% when Caitlin Clark had to step away because of her injury. Another metric that's very important to sport organizations is ticket pricing. So on the secondary ticket markets, prices fell by about 70%. It was quite sensitive to Caitlin Clark having to take a break. So what can we draw from that? Caitlin Clark has an amazing impact on the WNBA and on the Indiana Fever in terms of their revenue-generating opportunities. But also during that time, the Fever played the Chicago Sky, and that game earned 1.5 million in national broadcast viewers. That was 70% above the ABC average for last year. So while we know that League Limelight, Fever Limelight is sensitive to Caitlin Clark being on the floor, that there are opportunities to create momentum around high-stakes matchups like the rivalry between Indiana and the Sky, the Chicago Sky, that game was still quite popular, even while Caitlin Clark had to take a break from playing.
International consulting firm Deloitte said earlier this year that global revenue for women's sports is expected to be around $2.35 billion this year, after the figure cracked the $1 billion mark for the first time in 2024, clocking in at $1.88 billion to be exact. In January 2024, before Caitlin Clark broke the NCAA basketball scoring record in her senior year at the University of Iowa, but after she gained prominence with a dazzling performance in the 2023 Final Four, the Indianapolis-based NCAA secured a new media rights deal with ESPN for a package of 40 championships, including the Division I women's basketball tournament. That 8-year deal placed a $65 million value on the tournament, which is exponentially higher than what it was valued in the organization's 15-year deal for 29 championships previously, which totaled $34 million. But it's still miles below the value of the men's tournament through the NCAA's deal with CBS and Turner Sports, which comes in around $1 billion annually. For Charlie Baker, president of the NCAA, the long-term goal is to continue the growth of the women's tournament, to bring it more even with the men's, from a value standpoint. But while he said he anticipates the interest to continue booming through 2032 when the women's deal expires, it's too soon to say how much of a gap may separate the two championships.
I certainly think the audience is absolutely there. I think the big challenge on that one is just going to be the growth of the program overall, meaning the kids and the adults who play women's basketball. If it continues to grow and expand the same way that it's grown and expanded over the course of, I'll call it the last 5 to 8 years, there will certainly be by 2032, which is when all these contracts come up, a huge opportunity to dramatically expand both the visibility and the investment in women's basketball going forward. I always said when I was in politics that if somebody asked me to answer a question about something that's more than a year or two down the road, to punt on it, because the simple truth of the matter is nobody knows. And what I can tell you is that we'll continue to invest in that championship and to invest in that sport because A, we believe in it, and B, we think it has a very high ceiling. And I can tell you this, I am sure that it will be bigger and better and more well-financed by the time we get to 2032 than it is today. But whether or not it will be as big as the men's tournament, hell, I don't know. And anybody who says they do know is pulling your leg.
But for major women's sports leagues, exposure to new audiences is something of a mixed bag, with some benefiting from well-timed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and others struggling to pick up views of their games on social media, a position that some WNBA teams found themselves in not long ago. The National Women's Soccer League signed a $240 million media rights deal in late 2023. At the time, it was the most lucrative in women's sports history. And since 2020, the league's expansion fee has swelled from $5 million to more than $100 million per team, with numerous cities vying for spots. Even so, there's no telling how high Deloitte's women's sports forecast figure could climb in the coming years, or how steeply it might fall. Others haven't been so lucky. The Professional Women's Hockey League lacks a media deal in the States. The Professional Volleyball Federation has a limited deal with CBS Sports for select games, the All-Star Game, and its championship tournament matches, with most of its regular season contests just broadcast on YouTube, if at all. The league, of which Indy Ignite was a member in its inaugural season, on August 5th announced that it had merged with and assumed the name of the upstart Major League Volleyball, a deal that some publications have pegged around $325 million. And the Women's Football Alliance, a multi-tier, semi-pro-to-pro tackle football league, struck a deal with the All-Women's Sports Network earlier this year to broadcast select games, and has separately secured a deal with ESPN to show the league's championship. The local Indiana Valor participated in a lower rung of the league for the team's inaugural season that concluded in the spring. Allison Barber, a former Indiana Fever executive, said additional exposure is key to building demand for women's sports events long term.
I think across all the sports for women, we're making great progress. I think viewership continues to be a challenge. So getting eyeballs on the games, on the matches, on the golf outings, that will all continue to be a challenge. The more people go into streaming and digital, and as that continues to evolve, maybe that becomes less of an issue, but that still seems to be an important metric of success is, are you getting the eyeballs? So that's, to me, seems like an important focus to keep vigilant about gaining more eyeballs for women's sports. The talent is there, the notoriety is there, just the visibility has to continue to grow.
But Indianapolis isn't the only city chasing the title of women's sports capital. Other cities like Columbus, Seattle, Dallas, Louisville, and Kansas City have all expressed a desire to be a leader in the space, and a few are arguably a bit further ahead. Kansas City in March 2024 became the first major U.S. city to develop a venue dedicated to a women's pro sports franchise, with the 11,500-seat CPKC Stadium, a venue for the Kansas City Current, part of the National Women's Soccer League. The team has backing from NFL quarterback Patrick Mahomes and his wife Brittany. While other venues have been developed to incorporate women's teams into their design, according to public media outlet KCUR, the Current's venue is the only one on record to be solely intended for a women's team. Kansas City is also set to host the Division I women's volleyball and soccer championships this year. To date, Indianapolis has never bid on the Women's Volleyball Championship because the date coincides with the Indy Classic, formerly the Crossroads Classic at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. The city did bid on the Women's NCAA Soccer Championship, but withdrew its bid after the trajectory for Indy 11's soccer stadium plan became untenable. More on that later. The mayors of Columbus and Louisville have also said they want their cities to become the women's sports capital. Columbus will host the NCAA Women's Final Four and the NCAA Volleyball title game in 2027, a moment that city officials say Columbus will be at an inflection point in its efforts to build a strategy around women's sports. Louisville already has an NWSL team, the Racing Louisville Football Club, which was founded in 2019. The city has also hosted several women's sporting events, particularly at the collegiate level over the past few years, including the NCAA Volleyball Championship in 2024. Like Indianapolis, both cities have said they want to bring in more women's sports-centric businesses and create leadership programs for women in the industry, in addition to building up youth programs and bidding on more events. But the principal of Indianapolis-based sports consulting company Game Changers, Michelle Perry, said there's plenty of room for growth in the women's sports space, whether in Indianapolis or beyond.
I think people are starting to see the value and the power of women's sports, and that if you invest in it, there's real return on that investment.
Perry, also a former NCAA executive, said creating opportunities for women in professional sports is a logical step for the industry, particularly as it looks to capture demographics beyond the male audience to which it has catered for decades. But she added that the value of women's sports goes beyond that, because it creates inroads for youth sports programs for boys and girls, and offers a level of accessibility not found in leagues like the NFL, NBA, and MLB.
I don't ever want this to become transactional, where the only way we measure success is by looking at our balance sheet, because I think women's sports is so much more valuable than that. I think we've seen women's sports, and you look at our college athletes, they have always been accessible to fans. They have always done the community outreach and the community engagement, because we've always, through our whole careers, had to start at the grassroots level to prove and to build that fan base. And so I think we're starting to reap the benefits and see the results of those efforts for the last 40 years. And we're seeing corporations and franchises see the value, and cities see the value in this investment, and that it performs and it serves a really broad community purpose.
Mel Raines, CEO of Pacers Sports and Entertainment, said it's important to recognize why Indianapolis has been able to go all in on women's sports in the first place.
The real hero in the story really is Herb Simon, who held on to this team and unwavering for 24 seasons until last year's 25th season. And he looks brilliant in hindsight, but there were a lot of people over the years that were his peers in the league who shut their teams down, and many NBA teams didn't keep their WNBA team, and he always thought it was the right thing to do, and he enjoyed the team and certainly thought that it was going to get to where it is today one day.
Well, Indiana has several major events coming down the pike. The next major women's sporting event is the Final Four in 2028, the city's first time hosting since 2016. The city missed out on hosting the event the past couple of bid cycles due to scheduling conflicts. The city will also host the Division II and Division III women's basketball championships the same weekend. Raines said hosting major women's events, whether it's the Fever or events at the collegiate level, all play a role in propelling interest in women's sports, locally and beyond.
Women are 50% or a little more than 50% of the population, which means we're 50% of the consumers. It's clear that they're very talented, and now that there's more eyes on them, the national TV games, more people coming, more fans seeing it in person. I think when you talk to someone who's seen their first Fever game, they'll tell you got to go see it yourself. And once you come, you want to come back. And so I think they're just finally getting the eyes on the product that has been there for some time, but I'm excited they're getting the attention that they should. And I think it's just going to keep growing now.
Pro volleyball is here, Central Indiana. The brand new Fishers Event Center will fill with fans Saturday night. The Indy Ignite announced a sellout of the more than 7,000-seat venue days ahead of their first ever home match.
In late 2023, two Indianapolis-based businessmen, Don Hutchinson and Jim Schumacher, made their first foray into sports team ownership, the launch of the Indy Ignite volleyball team. That team, which wrapped up its first season in May with an appearance in the Pro Volleyball Federation Championship, played home matches at Fishers Event Center, a $170 million venue that is also home to minor league hockey's Indy Fuel and the Indoor Football League's Fishers Freight. The team said it had sold out multiple games during its first season, although firm attendance numbers have not been made public. Mary Kay Hughes is the general manager of the team.
Professional volleyball had been and doing really well in Europe and Asia for many years. And so the thought of, hey, can the U.S. be successful with professional women's volleyball? And then can this Indianapolis market be successful? We really one of those top states with all of this talent. We have over 10,000 high schoolers participating in the sport here in Indiana. So it was a lot of up into the right opportunity, and seeing that with the right execution and putting the right team together, there was something that could be potentially really special, and that's absolutely playing out for us.
Hughes said she was pleased with the results from the first year, including the involvement the team was able to make the most of at community events, the pre-match tailgates, and other guerrilla marketing opportunities.
That impact far exceeded any of my expectations, and how much we were able to grow even within the season through that word of mouth because of the experience and the team's performance.
Hughes, like many other managers of professional teams, declined to discuss specifics of the team's financial performance. But she also said that despite an overall below 500 record in the regular season, the team's run to the championship, paired with strong attendance figures, made for a successful first year. Moving forward, she said, the focus is on further improving both. The team recently hired a new head coach in Lauren Berlacci, who heads the Swiss women's national team. Hughes said while financial performance is important, more intangible elements like community impact and brand recognition also play a role in evaluating the team's success.
Like any startup, you build a financial forecast and you're shooting a little bit in the dark. Advantages and disadvantages to that, because you can believe your own dreams. But no, we were actually more accurate in our forecasts than I really expected us to be. My biggest surprises were to put on a game day and some of the pre-game events we did, and just to put it on at the quality we want and to have that fan engagement that we want. We spent a little bit more than I had planned on, but we also made a little bit more than we expected. We did really well on ticket sales, not just on the quantity. Our average ticket price, we really held strong to the value. So we made a little more, we spent a little more overall, pretty directionally, pretty accurate. And frankly, we're in a go big or go home mentality.
She largely credited Reigns and Pacer Sports Entertainment with helping lay the foundation for the launch of the Ignite, both on the back end and through public support.
It is just mind-blowing. I started this job in January of 24, and in my first 30 days, I got to sit down with Mel Reigns. I just don't think other year zero franchises are having those conversations and support and mentorship. She's a real straight shooter. I love her. So she also told me all the things to get in front of and worry about. And so it's not just the cheerleading, it's the tangible advice and mentorship that is humbling, absolutely critical to our success. And, you know, that's before we signed Caitlin Clark. We've seen this Caitlin Clark effect. And then to have our Ignite players showcased in an August 24 game, again, nobody knows what to expect, who we are, what we do, but we're being showcased at a sold-out Gainbridge with Caitlin Clark playing. There's no value you can place on that.
The Ignite was one of 2 women's teams to launch this year in Central Indiana, alongside the semi-professional tackle football team, the Indiana Valor. But there could be other opportunities ahead too. A proposed downtown stadium has sparked talk about whether the city could be home to both men's and women's professional soccer. Since April 2024, Indianapolis has been pushing to join Major League Soccer, a move that would add a third major men's team alongside the Colts and Pacers and require heavy state and local backing. Pacer Sports Entertainment has confirmed it's part of the MLS effort, and sources tell IBJ the organization would likely lead the investment in both the team and a surrounding commercial district. And that MLS bid could open the door for women's soccer too. The same sources said there's strong interest in landing a National Women's Soccer League team to share the stadium. Indianapolis already has the Indy 11, a second-tier men's team owned by developer Ursal Özdemir. He's long chased an MLS invitation, and even tried to build a stadium on the old Diamond Chain site, plans that fell apart when the city made his own MLS push. But Özdemir also owns a women's 11 squad, which hopes to join the USL Super League. However, neither that nor his MLS dream can happen without a stadium. Likewise, the absence of a 15,000 to 25,000 seat venue means the Indiana Sports Corp, which leads the state's sports tourism strategy, can't even bid on NCAA soccer, lacrosse, or field hockey championships, much less host national team matches or major rugby events. Sarah Meyer said a stadium wouldn't just unlock those bids, it could reshape how Indianapolis approaches sports altogether, giving the city new leverage in both men's and women's athletics.
We have been vocal about that we would be very supportive of a soccer stadium. I think that is something that we've heard from some of our rights holders, potential rights holders. That kind of venue could be very useful for future events. It's not just thinking about the event side. It's events, it's business, it's people. It's investing in the people. So I think that's what's so special about this women's sports pillar is it's not just about the athletes and the teams, but it's about that broader vision.
Raines said she sees massive value in having Pacers Sports and Entertainment, which she's overseen as CEO since last June, take a more prominent role in advocating for women's sports in Indianapolis.
I'd like to be there faster than 2050. I think having the fever is certainly one way to do it. Hosting events like WNBA All-Star and Women's Final Four are important, but our female leadership here and developing them to be the next leaders of sports teams around the city or organizations around the city is important. Investing in youth sports for girls, I think, is really important. But how else can we be a thought partner in women's sports performance research and those kinds of things that I think could really set our city apart? I think there's a lot of cities that will have teams and will host events, and we won't get all of them, obviously. But I think there's a couple of areas where we can really set ourselves apart, and we're trying to dig in and see where we can be more helpful than just having the fever here in town. We need to be more actively involved in that.
Hughes said, with the launch of the Indy Ignite, she's been involved in a renewed push to make Indiana a stronger volleyball hub in the coming years, an effort that's already well underway and could mean more championship events in the state. The NCAA has said it considered women's volleyball to be one of its fastest growing sports, both in terms of university investments in their programs and viewership. An average of 1.3 million people watched the national championship in 2024. And while that's a drop from a record 1.9 million in 2023, the sport's regular season saw a 21% jump year over year. As a state, Indiana has already become home to major youth volleyball events like the Nike Mid-East Qualifier, held annually at the Indiana Convention Center. But driving more fans to attend games, there's an opportunity to bid on or create events that could further tap into that interest.
We're in active conversations with the Sports Corp planning 2-3 years out of what that landscape can look like. Louisville hosted the NCAA championships this past December, and it went very well, and I think we could blow that away. Purdue had 2 games at Mackey this past year, sold out in hours, 16,000, 17,000, set some Big Ten records. And that's a good sign of things to come at the collegiate level. You don't have to focus on just the championships, even getting some of the first rounds here, which Indianapolis has really done with March Madness. And thankfully, we have an incredible partner with Sports Corp who is used to that bid process, has the relationships in those important organizations.
Allison Barber was president of the Indiana Fever from 2019 to 2024. She stepped down from the role following Clark's rookie season to focus on growing interest in women's sports and advocating for dedicated spaces for female athletes. Barber is now the president of the Marvella Foundation, the nonprofit arm of an entity that is spending $98 million on the first phase of an extravagant campus in Fair Oaks, Indiana, about halfway between Indianapolis and Chicago. The 3-phase project is expected to occupy 120 acres and 300,000 square feet of buildings by the time it's finished. It'll have components like numerous turf fields and courts for basketball, as well as spaces for volleyball, flag football, lacrosse, and soccer, as well as a multi-purpose arena for championship events. The sprawling development is also expected to feature training facilities, educational programming, physical and mental health support, an expansive media center, and a museum focusing on Indiana's role in the passage of Title IX, a federal law established in 1972 that bolstered funding for women's sports and was championed by the organization's namesake, Marvella the wife of former Indiana Senator Birch Bayh.
It seems like it's been overnight, this rise in women's sports. But it's every great startup. It's about a 10 to 15 or 20 year work hard in your garage or your basement or whatever you're building as your startup. And then all of a sudden when it all hits and it's magical, it seems like it just happened overnight. The truth is this has been growing and building. We've been planting seeds that are now just coming to fruition for women in sports. So it's a lot of pathway, a lot of years of planting the seeds and creating this platform that now is really hitting on all cylinders, and it's exciting to see, and it's happening across many sports.
Barbara said the facility is planned to be one of 5 across the United States, and given that the push for more girls to be involved in women's sports well predates Caitlin Clark's arrival on the scene, it won't be beholden to what's happening in the pro ranks, although success there could certainly further interest among younger athletes.
At Marvella, our model demonstrates that we'll have over 400,000 girls coming through our campus by year 5. So you might find that the right corporate partners will say, this is the population we want to support and embrace. And it makes sense from a business standpoint, which it needs to. And we're in a different day. Back years and years ago, companies would support women's sports out of benevolence. Now it's a business deal, that's really a good transition for sure. So we're finding the conversations to be exciting and optimistic. And it's never easy to land partners and figure out the right deal. We've designed this with Indiana being the flagship, and then we will look strategically into other markets that make sense for geographically and in the support and the business community of that area to build out 4 more Marvella campuses, but Indiana will always be the flagship.
For Liz Wanless, the professor at IU Indianapolis, major investments in women's sports focused on infrastructure and opportunities are critical to helping reduce the gap in the industry, which is dominated by male-centered sports. She noted that it's not just Marvella that's helping move the needle, but a new training center for the Indiana Fever.
There needs to be a very strong effort to anchor major women's sporting events. And by strong, a very determined effort, and not just important North American women's sporting events, but global women's sporting events. And that's going to be an important part of how people view the execution of the 2050 vision down the road. I think the continued investment in infrastructure, it's already been an incredible investment with this Fever facility, as well as the $98 million Marvella project. That's an incredible investment in infrastructure. But keep that momentum going. Keep where there is an opportunity to build infrastructure, let's do it. I think that there's an opportunity to create a women's sport innovation district.
She said those investments will be particularly important if Caitlin Clark were to ever leave the Fever or the WNBA to find greener pastures, or when her career in the league comes to an end.
I feel that deeply, even if we're saying that in a hypothetical scenario. But if it were to happen, I think from a women's basketball standpoint, Indianapolis and the Indiana Fever will be tested as to how well they built out infrastructure surrounding the team in terms of community, in terms of girls basketball, in terms of how we have facilitated around the professional realm on a community level. They will be tested. They will be tested as to how well they have fostered and encouraged high-stakes matchups and rivalries to be premier events in the absence of Caitlin Clark. In terms of the 2050 strategy, that visibility was very helpful to create energy and enthusiasm, but it won't be the only opportunity to create energy and enthusiasm. So we'll see Indiana rise to the occasion and continue to support women's sport. These are significant investments that cannot be replaced, and they are indicative of the commitment of the Indianapolis area to support the growth of women's sport with the goal to achieve global recognition for that. Is it a dead end if Caitlin Clark were to leave? No, but it is a test as to how well Indianapolis builds out women's sport and the momentum behind women's sport as a global entity wholeheartedly, rather than focusing on just one player.
For Meyer and the Indiana Sports Corp, the 2050 vision allows the organization to better understand what steps need to be taken in order to continually position itself to not be reactionary, but an active player in the conversations, events, and businesses that propel women's athletics forward.
When you put a vision out there and you get people really galvanized around it, I think there's just something different around that. I think the vision before and the sports strategy before was really to bring organizations and events here and host them at a high level. Now we're thinking more broadly, and because we need to think more broadly, we have to think of that way in everything that we do. I think with future WWE events, with Olympic swimming trials in 2028, we are going to think differently and more intentionally around those pillars of the 2050 vision and how we're using these events to advance those pillars. So it's exciting. It's exciting to know that you're evolving your thinking that way too, because man, we've done these events so well for so long. And I think now it's time that we're thinking a little bit differently on how these events are actually a part of a larger thing that we've got going on here. And that's this sports ecosystem.
When Caitlin Clark was drafted by the Fever, many said the city won the basketball lottery. Despite the star's spate of injuries in her sophomore season, local leaders are confident that Clark's presence does nothing but bolster the efforts they began before she arrived to make Indianapolis a hub for women's sports. But it will also take decades for Indianapolis to fully reap the rewards of those investments, particularly if the momentum around women's sports stalls. After all, it could be considered folly for the city to set its sights on becoming the epicenter of an industry with little cultural or financial value. There are still many who question the value of giving women's sports a shot, when their male counterparts have seemingly already figured it out. And with few breakout stars like Clark grabbing the headlines, something leagues like the NBA, the NFL, and Major League Baseball have moved well past needing, women's sports are fighting an uphill battle. There's also the question of what happens if Clark's star fades, or if she leaves Indianapolis. Will the momentum go with her? It's a question to which most have a guess, but nobody has a confident answer. Really, only time will tell for sure. But as far as the Indianapolis of it all goes, and its hope of becoming the place for women's sports, industry experts like Michelle Perry said it's going to require a lot of time and money to bring that goal to fruition.
You can't just wear the t-shirt with the slogan on it. You got to put your money where your mouth is, and you've got to be committed and intentional and purposeful in your support and investment.
Beyond Clarkonomics is a production of the Indianapolis Business Journal. This episode was reported and written by Mickey Shuey and edited by Holly Hayes. The audio engineer and producer was Chris Spangle. Leslie Weidenbender is the editor of the Indianapolis Business Journal. Nate Beltman, owner and publisher. A special thanks to Fox 59, CBS 4, and Inside Indiana Business for Audio, with additional production assistance from Michelle Kaufman, Daniel Bradley, Dave Lindquist, and Michael Kirsch. Artwork by Ashley Day. Thanks for listening.
Get a behind-the-scenes look at Indiana's most influential leaders. On Business and Beyond, we go beyond titles and resumes to explore the personal stories, pivotal moments, and hard-won lessons that shape Hoosier leadership. Hear from the people driving Indiana forward in their own words. Subscribe and listen wherever you get your podcast or at ibjpodcasts.com.
On the go? So are we. Get the IBJ Media app, your all-in-one news source for Indiana business news. Get breaking news alerts, read every story from IBJ, Inside Indiana Business, and the Indiana Lawyer, and listen to your favorite podcasts all in one place. Big news, small screen. Search IBJ Media and download the app today.